It's early morning, and we sit in isolation because of COVID 19. And we have been doing this now for a month, and there's no end in sight as of yet. Hopefully, soon we will be able to have a return to some sort of normalcy, although it won't be what it was prior to the lockdown, the pandemic lockdown. I'm drinking coffee. I'm actually alone. Gerry is still sleeping, and I have thought a lot about how to express how I feel about everything during this pandemic, and I thought that I should write another fictional novel to join my other 4 fictional novels and children's book out there on Amazon, but I can't focus enough to do that. But one thing that keeps cropping up in my head is my dad. The nothing really to do with coping with a pandemic or anything like that, but just things that he says. Things my father says are, I guess I have to say said, because he's been gone since 2001, but his presence is still there. My mother, of course, is very much alive in my head as well, but my dad was the one that said so many memorable. My mother had a ton of memorable little sayings, yes, but my dad, they were different. They were incredibly different. I'm not sure how they ever got together, except they were young and started life together at a very young age, and they were very, very different people in personality. My mother had a big personality, and my dad had a more uh, quiet kind of personality, but that isn't exactly it either. So I'm not sure proper way to describe my dad. My dad had frailties. My dad had frailties for sure. He grew up in deep southeast Texas, where it looks like Georgia. It's nothing like you think of with Texas. People that have never really been to Texas think it's all flat, like West Texas and prairie dogs. It isn't. You have a vast topography in Texas. So when my dad grew up, it was uh, hilly, very hilly, and red dirt and gorgeous, gorgeous landscaping. The landscaping of it, huge pine trees and all sorts of magnolia trees and sweet gum trees, all sorts of trees. So where he grew up was really pretty. You couldn't make a living there, he said. So he moved to Fort Worth, Texas, where he earned his living. And he he would tell great stories. He told great stories about his childhood. He was the oldest of 5 boys, and he raised the youngest one, and so they were really very close. The middle 3 were not that close in adult life, not really. I mean, for the years that there were years where they were closer than others, I guess, like all families. But back in the day, they had a woman who came and helped their mother, and her name was Tora, which I think is a great name. And she called, instead of calling them brothers, she would ask how their briar was, which I don't know the meaning of that, if there's some kind of other meaning to that, but so that's what they called each other. Hey Briar, hey Briar. They called each other that instead of their names, which I thought was kind of cool because I have a lot of nicknames in my life. But my dad would tell these great stories about where he worked. He was always in my lifetime, he was always the boss of the of his people at his company, and he was a genius. His trade initially was tool and die maker, but that's what he learned as a young man, and what he taught many other people. But it grew beyond that because he was a great mathematician, and he invented things, and he was so smart. And I'm a big failure in math, so I know that disappointed him. And he always told me, "You need math," and I would argue that I would never need math in real life. How do you need this other than just being able to, add and subtract and things like that? You do. You need it in cooking. You need it in many walks of life. So he was 100% right. But he told this one story about this guy at the office, and he was very rotund, very rotund. My dad was muscular. Uh, he was not ever fat. He put on more weight as years went on. He was very slight in his young years. But he would talk about this man. This man's last name was Gunn, Gunn, and he would come into my dad's office, and my dad had a one of these great antique swivel chairs. You see them in movies. You see them in the old movies. They look like stickly furniture. If you're familiar with the way that wooden furniture is made, had a curved back, and uh, and he would come and sit in one of my dad's chairs. And my dad always wondered how it withheld his weight. It's like, oh, these chairs really are made so well because they hold his weight. Until one day when this man's name was Gene, and Gene and his wife had the audacity to to name one of their sons Tommy. Mm-hmm. Tommy Gunn. Get it? But he sat down in that chair, and my dad heard a noise, and he watched as though in slow motion, the chair just sank to the floor under the weight of this man, and he wasn't hurt, and he didn't get up. He just sat there as it went to all the way to the floor. What my dad did not do was BS. He did not. He didn't. He was smart in some. He was like a detective. He knew if a car had been moved. He knew if you had opened a door. And he said that about me. It's like I would close my bedroom door when I went to school, and I didn't want anyone going in there. And he said, if anybody even opens that door, she knows it. It was true, so I inherited that trait. But there was a story of someone that he could see through BS, and he could see through lies. You may not call it out, but he could see through it. And so myself, not appreciating liars and people who don't tell the truth when it's just as easy. They will lie when the truth is just as easy. I don't like people who cheat, who steal, or lie. And he would tell, and so and he knew a lot about everything. He could wire a house, he could plumb a house, he could build a house. He did. I've seen him. And there wasn't anything that would baffle him when he decided to raise some horses. He took on training them and trained himself to be a trainer. And, I mean, so he was just this amazing, but yet, as I said, flawed man. And and you wouldn't want to cross my dad, by the way. Although I was able to go toe to toe with him because I think I'm a lot like him. But this one incident happened where this person was very late, and he was very worried, and the the car arrived with this person, and shone the lights into the house. This was a person he had been waiting on, and so the person says, "I'm late." My dad was very angry about it, and the person says, "Well, I couldn't get here because the person bringing me's car broke down." And he said, "How?" Because it sounded fine and it looked fine. Well, it was the generator. And he said, "Don't tell me that when those headlights were that bright. No, that isn't what happened. So he could see through people and things. And I just always appreciated that so much about him. So I think during this time of isolation, instead of writing fictional things, I want to share some of these great stories. Some of them seem kind of cruel that my dad would tell. The first three brothers in his family, his name was Daryl, Daryl Lee. His second brother was William Franklin, and the third was Robert Cecil. Well, the third one, and the fourth one was Lloyd Weldon, and the final one was El Ray. And but where they lived in deep southeast Texas, the piney woods of southeast Texas, these massive hills were near their home. And right now there are, or there were, I haven't been back in many years, but there were historical markers. One was by a magnolia tree as being the largest one in Texas on their land. And the other one was for this beef road, that they called it beef road because cattle people brought cows through this road, this red dirt road that was complete forest on each side. As a matter of fact, I think it's the Angelina forest that is there. I may be wrong about that, but it is a forest, a designated forest there. And they would bring trucks through, and logging trucks as well on this road, mainly logging. But they would get on one side of the road, and they would put Cecil, the third brother, Frank and my dad, into a tire, and they would roll him down that hill. And and so in later life, Cecil wasn't really that close to my dad. And one time they told him to climb up a pine tree to get some pine cones or something, and they chopped the tree down when he was in the top of the tree. He wasn't hurt. They were rough and tumble guys. One funny story, and I do have an antique plow that belonged in my dad's family. They were having to plow a garden with a horse. I mean, I'm talking way back there. And he and his brother were taking turns doing it, and they were really mad, so they were cussing. And my grandfather, they didn't know I was walking behind them, and they got in a lot of trouble for doing that. But through the years, my dad has told great stories, and so I'm leaning on that, and I'm leaning on finding a way to get through each day without letting it get to us. Gerry and I both are, and we're finding that way. But I've just thought a lot about my dad, and even though he was flawed, he was imperfect, like we all are. But he had this code of honor. He had a code of honor. He was the kind of man that would give you his last dollar if you needed it. He would help you in any way. If you were decent people, I mean, he didn't have any use for people that did not have integrity, that didn't have a moral compass. He didn't have use for that. But if you were a person of integrity and honor, no matter if you had no money, that mattered not to him. But you could still have a code of honor. And my maternal grandfather loved to tell the story of being in the hospital, very ill. And my dad came to see him and chatted with him. And when my dad left, my grandfather realized that my dad had stuffed $100 bill under his pillow, just as a gesture to, if you need anything. In other words, here's $100. It may not seem like much, but it was. I mean, my dad was that kind. He would, if you were stopped on the side of the road and you needed help, he would help you, and sometimes that's really dangerous to do. And I wouldn't recommend it today at all. But back in the day, he would do that, and he really would. Uh, he would. He never passed a lemonade stand or any kid that came to the door selling. He would, even if he only had a small amount of money, he would get what he could to contribute to the cause, as it were. He was he was a giver in that way. He would he understood the importance of helping fellow man. So this is entry one into what I'm temporarily calling the things my father said. Don't know if I'll do another entry, but I have done one, and that's a beginning.